Uh, Good morning. It's Thursday, October 23rd, 2025. This is a special meeting of the Board of Education Finance Committee in Darien, Connecticut. Our first item on the agenda is a review of the September 2025 financial report. Mr. Ruber.
All right. So this is the financial report through September. We do show a positive balance of $500,607, which is an increase of $16,295 from the previous report. We do have salary savings from our vacant HVAC positions. We may or may not have to move that into contracted services later on in the year, and we'll bring a transfer forward if we do have to do that. We do have a slight increase to turnover savings of $11,669. We did have another teacher leave since the last report. The new salary schedule for special education paraprofessionals has generated another $6,000 as we had another turnover. The new salary schedule for secretaries has saved another $5,700 as we do have a new secretary at Oxbridge. We have some salary savings for a librarian, just saved $4,600. We had a workers' comp adjustment for a negative $520. And we have a placeholder for a security assessment of $50,000. We have an RFP out currently, and depending on the results of that, we'll update that and then bring a transfer forward to the board once we have a final number. So overall, the general education RCs are a positive 132,476, and the special education RCs are a positive 368,135. And just going through the RCs real quickly. RC1, we do have savings, salary savings of $4,600 from that, from the librarian that I mentioned earlier. RC3, while not a different number from the previous report, we had a custodian from the middle school go to Tokenique where the savings was in the previous report. So now the savings are reflected at the middle school. And actually at the next report, it'll end up going to the high school as somebody from the high school is transferring to the middle school. RC8, as I mentioned, we have a new secretary at Oxbridge. And so we have savings of $5,700. RC12, again, we have the two vacant HVAC positions. So we do have salary savings of just over $38,000. RC18 turnover is slightly higher. Available balance is $74,000. I did want to highlight a couple of things. So we do have 34 teachers turning over for a savings of $630. Included in this are the two positions at the middle school that we did budget for to turn over to 5 sections, which was a Spanish teacher and math teacher. So that was budgeted, but we had included it in turnover because we were making the assumption that those teachers would leave. And so we was just meeting the expectations of the budget, and that was for $208,000. And again, that was Spanish and math. RC24, as I mentioned, we did get another paraprofessional on the new salary schedule. So those savings have crept up to $105,896. And then RC27, we have a pending deficit of $50,000 for a placeholder for a security assessment, pending the results of an RFP.
Quiet.
Hi, sorry about that. So just RC18, this seems like there's a lot going on in there. Could you just kind of go through it in more detail? You know, the turnover, and then it says we also the 25,000 in the last column.
Sure. And let me, if I could piggyback on that. And then we got a question from Mr. Palin on essentially the difference between the 4 to 5 at MMS. So you talk a little bit more about that. And then the salary savings line, which you have added as a separate line item recently. You know, let's spend a little time on this because it's an item that's come up between us a few times.
Sure. So salary savings is different from turnover. And so what salary savings is when an individual employee leaves and we haven't filled that position right away, there's a gap in time in which we're not actually paying any employee. So it's not permanent savings to the budget. It's just that gap in time that you have. And so new from last fiscal year and we carried it over to this fiscal year is a credit in the budget to assume that we're going to have staff somewhere within the budget where we're just not paying them because there's that timing difference.
And where was that money prior in turnover before you implemented that line item?
So when we implemented the line item, it was just a separate line item, salary savings. Prior to implementing that line item, it was just within the individual salary accounts.
Okay.
So you would have seen money in, let's say, a custodian account or a maintenance account, maybe a para account, a secretary account, administrator account, depending on the individual. Last fiscal year, we created that salary savings account. And so what we'll end up doing later in the year, typically in January, is we'll compress those accounts. So you'll see an adjustment. Well, we'll take the salary savings. So for For this fiscal year, we have some for the Director of Elementary Ed, we have some for those HVAC positions, we have one for the network manager. We'll take that money and then we'll compress it, and so that credit will go away, and then the savings in the other accounts will go away.
Got it. Perfect.
So for turnover, for this year, typically we budget a certain amount for teacher turnover.
Sorry, I'm gonna stop. Which step do you like average turnover? You have to pick a kind of
We
salary
do. So
range.
typically we take the top step of the salary and then we assume that we're gonna end up picking somebody, about, MA 13 or 14. It'll depend on the subject matter. So typically what we see is more savings on an elementary teacher, less savings on a special education teacher. So it'll depend on what subject that we're actually filling. And then it'll depend on the count. So one of the things we saw this year is we saw less teachers turn over, but we saw more savings. And that's really a product of the fact that we brought up the salaries of that lower end of the salary schedule. So we were actually able to hire more teachers on the lower end. And so we actually saw greater savings, even though it was a lower count, where in the past we have greater count, but we were hiring people maybe at MA, 14 or MA 15. And so the savings were smaller. And this is really a product of being able to hire more at the lower end. So in this budget, we also had 2 more teachers at the middle school that we were waiting to go from 4 to 5. And so the contract for the teachers only allows us to do that through attrition. So you can't reduce a position. Somebody has to leave, whether it's a retirement or a resignation, they have to end up leaving. And so in the budget that was approved for this year, we made the assumption that a Spanish teacher and a math teacher would leave. If they didn't leave, then we couldn't materialize those savings. So a Spanish teacher and a math teacher did leave within the district. And so we received that $208,000, which is what we budgeted for. But we put it in that turnover line. Should somebody not actually leave, then it would have affected turnover.
So said a different way, when we set this year's fiscal budget, fiscal year 26, you couldn't assume that we completed 4 to 5 because you were waiting for attrition amongst the teachers at Middlesex.
So we made an assumption that we would complete it, but
Okay.
we didn't put it in the Middlesex line item because we didn't actually know anybody would leave.
Okay.
So had nobody left the district, then we would not have completed the 4 to 5 in those subject areas. But because they did, we take the savings from the Spanish line and then the math line, and then it kind of goes to the turnover line, which is how it gets compressed.
Got it. Okay. Does that make sense? Anybody want to? Okay, I think Jill, do you have any questions on that subject or?
No, I just think that's a really important one. If we could be prepared to repeat that on Tuesday night. And I think also when we have the contract discussion, explain the tie between, and I think, John, this is your point, explain the tie between last contract, this contract, and these kinds of numbers.
Yeah, I mean, well, Tuesday night would be a great point, but I think even with the last contract, one thing that we highlighted was the fact that, when you looked at where our competitiveness was amongst the teachers, it was at the higher end of the range. When we say higher end, we mean the higher end of the salary steps as defined in the contract. And we brought up the lower step categories to a more competitive salary range. So interestingly, as Rich pointed out, even though the number of teachers are, it's price times quantity, if you will, the quantity of teachers turnover was lower, or attrition, or however you want to say it. But the value that was saved within each turnover was higher. And so the turnover line is coming actually without this Middlesex pretty much in line with what you budgeted, right? So in my mind, as we think about it and as we thought about it in this upcoming teacher's contract, which we'll talk more about Tuesday night, we wanted to continue that because as a board of education, I think we're focused on like quality of education in a reasonable fiscal manner. And what's happening is we're actually, seeing less turnover, which I think is great for the district, great for our students, but at the same time realizing more efficiencies or savings. And so more people want to come is basically the point.
The driver of with lower turnover, the driver of the savings is the fact that we're trading like older, more expensive teachers for new, less expensive teachers.
Yeah,
That's
so
all
it
I'm
used to
saying.
be that we would trade the higher expensive teachers for just other districts' higher expensive teachers. So now we're trading our higher expensive teachers for lower expensive teachers. So it's been a number of years since we've been below 40 in terms of turnover. I mean, we had a couple of years where we were in the upper 60s and 70s in terms of teachers leaving, but the dollar amount we saved was probably half because somebody would leave, let's say at 115,000, but then we'd hire somebody at 110,000. So you're only saving maybe 5,000. Now somebody's leaving at 115,000 and then maybe you're hiring them at like 75 or 80,000. So the quantity is lower, as John mentioned, but the value between the two is greater.
So essentially, in my mind, the last contract was successful, and we'll talk more about what this contract achieves on Tuesday night. So, but that's a great point. We'll definitely highlight that because I think it's among a number of different things underappreciated what we strategically tried to implement over at least the 6 years that I've been here.
And as we think about the budget for next year or next budget, I think that it will be good for us to hear about how you think about this going forward. And is there a change? You know, obviously, we're not trying to force turnover. We actually want to do the opposite. But if there's cost savings, even at a lower number, understanding, okay, why is the dollar amount going up?
So no district's ever going to have zero. I mean,
Right.
everybody has some turnover. It's just a matter of how much turnover. And so I think what you'll see in next year's budget is something more similar to what's worked out here, where we'll probably budget in that, 30-ish range of teachers turning over, but that higher dollar amount. Because even the teacher contract coming up, there was also another elevation of those at the lower steps to help us compete against the Westports, the New Canaans, the Greenwich, et cetera.
Yep.
Go ahead.
And when we talk about this, it's not a finance discussion as much, but of course, when we talk about it on Tuesday, we want a balanced labor pool. We want teachers of different, coming out of the educational system at different points in time, because that's good for our students, that's good for our fellow teachers. So we can talk about it also in that context. I think that's really important that we not just talk about, you're in finance, so you should be, but when we talk about it, we talk about the impact to our education in a positive way, because it is positive.
Yeah, a big strategy of ours was really focus on recruitment, retention, professional development, attendance. There are all of these pieces as we went into the contract. And, there are a lot of sort of ripple effects of those things financially that are positive, but in terms of what we can deliver to children, I think the long-term benefits are just wonderful in what we've achieved in that negotiation.
From my standpoint, it's really cool to see kind of play out in numbers because that's my forte in life, I guess, in my professional expertise. But, to Jill's point, the ripple effects through the curriculum and education experience has been better and is going to be awesome as this goes forward. So any other questions? Anything on grants or
Food
I know we have
service-
no transfers, so I just.
So there are no transfers. The food service fund, as we mentioned before, always starts at a deficit and you kind of bring your way out of it. The deficit's improved by about 60,000 from the previous month, which is kind of expected. September has more serving days, obviously, than August, and then October will have more serving days. So you'll start to see that slowly come down. And then the grants are pretty much the same. We did receive, or the state did award what they called the SEED grant. And so the SEED grant is to help districts develop special education programs within district. The allocations are only based on how ECS is funded. And so as a wealthier community, the funding for Darien is very small. So what we'll receive is $8,700. There's not a lot of new programs you can create with $8,700. So we're gonna have to see how we can actually allocate that money. But that is an award that is new from the previous month.
Go ahead.
So I've been getting a lot of questions. I know Title I and Title III were direct from dollars from the federal government. And we already weren't receiving those anymore. But a lot of people are asking if there's any way to know, with the federal money that goes to the state that then comes to us, if you have any indication if that's going to change at all.
So the money, the other main federal grant we receive is the IDEA grant. That allocation is actually slightly higher than the previous year. Not by much, but about, $20,000, $30,000 more than the previous.
And give a sense of what that is. What's it for and how much money?
So it's a grant for special education. The district here uses it primarily for additional special education paraprofessionals, special education teacher, a portion of a psychologist. So it does have to be used for students with special education needs. It can't be expenses that you're also going to apply for excess costs. So we have to weigh the individuals who are in that grant as to make sure that they're not providing services for students who are ECR eligible. But it is a federal award that then goes to the state, and the state distributes it to the municipalities. It is, like I mentioned, about $30,000 more than the previous grant that we received. And then the only other federal grant we received is Title II. Title II is primarily a professional education grant that goes through curriculum. And that's been relatively flat. As you mentioned, we no longer receive Title I. That is a large grant that comes through from the federal government, but we lost that grant last year.
And that has to do with,
So that has to do with the number of students, not necessarily students who go to Darien Public Schools, but the number of children who who are below the poverty level in your community. And so whether they attend Darien schools or they go to a private school somewhere else, it's based on that income level within the community.
and we fell below the
And we fell
threshold,
below the threshold just slightly.
which is a good thing that there's less children in poverty, but not a good thing that we lost the grant money.
In the conversations with the commissioner and the regular superintendent meetings, obviously with the turmoil in Washington and the education department, there is concern about what happens with the federal funding. The reality is that the IDEA money is not money that has really come up as something that will potentially disappear. There has been some talk about it going over to HHS and being administered through HHS. But it just, we don't know at this moment in time. I think it would be very difficult for that money to just disappear based on everything I'm hearing from the state.
What about, to Joanne, as the second derivative? So if the state funding gets pulled, what state funding do we get? I mean, it's basically ECE.
So for it's ECS, which goes directly to the town, and for the town, it's about $450,000. And then it's ECR, so excess cost reimbursement. That is a state grant, and that comes directly to the Board of Ed. The state did put more money in that allocation, but typically when that happens, it's because there's more expenses coming down, so more money doesn't necessarily mean a higher grant reimbursement in all cases. That is the one main state driver there.
And there's been no, this, again, special education associated.
Yeah, so the budget that was passed by the state put more money into that pot, so there's no discussion of that actually going.
Yeah.
Good, but
So RC19 curriculum had a $13,000 savings, but there was nothing explaining what that was. Can you?
So that is salary savings for the turnover in the director of elementary education. So there was a gap in time between when Jen was hired and the previous individual left.
Okay, thank you.
anything else, Greg? Good. All right, so Tuesday's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
I think we're talking some preliminary budget stuff. We'll talk about the teacher's contract, and some other good stuff. So, I think this is my last meeting. So thank you. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Mr. Rudel, it's been a great ride. Cass, thank you.
Thank you.
And Eric, you haven't been around too long. to Thank you too much. So, no, I appreciate it. It's been great, a great experience. So, look forward to Tuesday night too. So with that, public comment.
We have nobody in person.
Could I get a motion to adjourn? We are adjourned.